SMS Lam Pin Min.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the members for the queries, suggestions and support for the bill. Let me first address members' concerns about active mobility in general before moving on to the specifics of the bill. Several members of the House have emphasized the importance of safety on public paths. I cannot agree more. When the Active Mobility Advisory Panel released its recommendations on measures to enhance path safety in end August, and when the government announced our acceptance of the recommendations in early September, we similarly heard many comments about path safety, with some members of the public advocating for personal mobility devices to be completely banned from public paths. Mr. Speaker, to address Associate Professor Randolph Tan's question, our view is that active mobility has brought benefits to many Singaporeans. It provides more first, last mile options and complements the more traditional modes of transport. Active mobility devices provide new mobility options to those with walking difficulties and relatively cheap and convenient options for commuting or even for the purpose of work. Many members of the House, including Mr. Zainal Sapari, Mr. Louis Ng and Ms. Rahayu Mazam, have acknowledged these benefits. Rather than banning these devices, we would strike a balance that allows us to harness the potential of active mobility while mitigating the disamenities. We have therefore put in place a system of rules and regulations to govern the usage of devices on public paths. Each measure should not be seen in isolation. We also complement these with strict enforcement efforts, widespread education measures, and infrastructural improvements where we can. We recently accepted AMAP's recommendations to further improve the safety of path sharing. This includes mandating the registration of e-scooters, implementing a device speed limit of 10 km per hour on personal mobility aids, mandating helmets for active mobility device users on roads, and mandating stop and look at traffic crossings. Engineer Dr. Lee Bee Hua, Mr. Zainal Sapari, Ms. Rahayu Mazam, and Mr. Melvin Yong called for third-party liability insurance to be made mandatory. AMAP had considered the impact of this on the diverse group of active mobility users and determined that it was ultimately more important to prevent accidents from happening in the first place. We agree with the panel and will instead strengthen regulations to safeguard the safety of path users. With regard to Ms. Rahayu Mazam's suggestion on tapping on the Small Claims Tribunal for personal injury claims of up to $20,000, we understand that the tribunal does not hear personal injury claims. Instead, we have accepted the panel's recommendation to raise awareness of and accessibility to existing avenues of seeking compensation, such as working with the Singapore Mediation Centre or making mediation more accessible. As Mr. Ang Hin Kee and Ms. Cheng Li Hui have suggested, we will continue to strongly encourage and promote the take-up of third-party liability insurance, focusing on large employers of active mobility device users such as food delivery and commuting under the Workplace Safety and Health Act. The Ministry of Manpower, LTA, and the Traffic Police have issued a joint circular to delivery companies with concrete suggestions of steps they can take. Delivery companies should monitor the riding behavior of their riders, for instance, by providing an avenue for public reporting, and also train and educate their riders on the active mobility regulations and safe riding behaviors. Engineer Dr. Lee Bee Hua and Ms. Joan Pereira also spoke about increasing penalties for riders who cause serious injury to victims. Under the Active Mobility Act, individuals who ride recklessly can face up to $5,000 in fines and up to 6 months imprisonment. Those who cause grievous hurt can face even higher penalties under the Penal Code. In the case of a rider riding rashly, he can face up to $10,000 in fines and up to 4 years imprisonment. To answer Mr. Dennis Tan's query, the criminal justice system has different mechanisms for dealing with offenders who are under the age of 21. I thank Dr. Lee Bee Hwa, Associate Professor Randolph Tan, and Ms. Thanalakshmi for raising other potential areas for review, including pillion riders, handphone restrictions, and an incentive-based system to encourage safe riding. While these issues lie outside the scope of this bill, I assure members we will work closely with AMAP to continually review our active mobility rules and regulations, and we will take these suggestions into account when discussing the key areas of review with AMAP. I would also like to reassure Mr. Melvin Yong that we will certainly monitor the situation after AMAP's recommendations are implemented and review the measures as necessary depending on the prevailing situation. I would like to assure Ms. Joan Pereira and Ms. Cheng Liu Hui that we also undertake strong enforcement actions. LTA's team of 50 active mobility enforcement officers has issued over 3,000 advisories for unsafe riding on paths. With enhanced enforcement powers under the AMA since May 2018, LTA has stepped up its enforcement efforts and has detected over 1,300 active mobility offences between 1st May and 15 August 2018. The measures in this bill, including the PMD registration regime and the empowerment of outsourced enforcement officers, will further strengthen our enforcement efforts. I thank Mr. Gan Tiampo and Mr. Melvin Yong for the suggestion to adopt technology in our enforcement efforts. LTA is conducting a trial to study the effectiveness of mobile closed-circuit televisions in identifying and reducing errant riding behaviors along public paths. We will continue to explore how technology can enhance and complement our enforcement efforts so as to allow us to be effective while being manpower lean. We enforce strictly against retailers in Singapore that sell non-compliant devices for use on public paths. LTA recently conducted an enforcement blitz against 18 retailers and seized a total of 18 PMDs and 2 PABs for non-compliance. We agree with Dr. Lee Bee Hwa on the need to continue to enforce against such errant retailers and will continue to take a strong enforcement stance towards them. We also wish to inform Ms. Thanalakshmi that LTA can require retailers to display notices about the different types of devices and the relevant device criteria at their premises. To address Mr. Dennis Tan's concern, members of the public are encouraged to report retailers who willfully misrepresent the device specifications to LTA, and we will not hesitate to take firm action against such retailers. Mr. Gan Tiampo, Ms. Rahayu Mazam and Mr. Melvin Yong have asked about online retailers of PMDs. Where feasible, LTA engages online marketplace operators to remove postings of non-compliant devices, most of which are agreeable to doing so. However, some online retailers are based overseas, which limits our ability to enforce against them. Ultimately, PMD users must also exercise caution and take personal responsibility in choosing the device to buy and ride on public paths. It is in the consumer's interest to check that the devices that they buy comply with the device criteria. Non-compliant devices will not be allowed to be registered, and those used on public paths will be confiscated. We will continue to monitor the situation, including studying Mr. Ang Hin Kee and Mr. Dennis Tan's suggestion to raise public awareness of the legitimate retailers who sell compliant devices and of the popular device models which comply with our device criteria. As Mr. Ang Hin Kee, Mr. Gan Tiampo and Ms. Rahayu Mazam have highlighted, educational efforts are important to cultivate a culture of safe and gracious path sharing. We have rolled out several public education outreach initiatives along with the Safe Riding Program for active mobility users. As I mentioned earlier, over 9,000 riders have gone through the Safe Riding Program since it was launched in February this year. Delivery riders, such as those from Deliveroo, have also attended the program. We encourage all active mobility device users to attend the Safe Riding Program to learn and practice safe riding behaviors. Let me also reassure Mr. Dennis Tan and Mr. Melvin Yong They will continue to do our utmost to educate active mobility interest groups, schools, and the migrant worker community on safe riding. It is probably not necessary at the moment to have mandatory training, but we will certainly expand our outreach and engagement efforts to all the members of the public. Our active mobility infrastructure also helps to safeguard the safety of path users. I would like to reassure Mr. Melvin Yong that we have already started implementing measures such as appropriate signs reminding active mobility device users to slow down or watch out for traffic. We will continue to do so. Mr. Louis Ng asked about the width of footpaths. New footpaths with no adjacent cycling paths will now be 1.8 meters wide, wider than the previous minimum width of 1.5 meters. Apart from this, we are building dedicated cycling infrastructure where possible and introducing pedestrian priority zones, or PPZ, at locations along cycling paths with potentially high pedestrian-cyclist interactions. We will continue to improve our infrastructure island-wide, but these will take time to implement. I'd also like to thank Engineer Dr. Libiwa for the clarification on her example of disallowing the use of PMDs in town council areas. I'll be happy to get more details from her on the case and advise her accordingly. But it will be sufficient for me to remind members of the House that the Active Mobility Act serves to ensure that public paths are made available for active mobility users, and rules should be applied consistently so that users will not be confused with different rules at different areas. I hope I have addressed the members' concerns about the active mobility safety. As with the introduction of any new mode of transport, it will take time for all user groups to adjust. As Mr. Ang Hin Kee and Mr. Louis Ng pointed out, ultimately, the key is for Singapore to develop a safe and gracious sharing culture for our public paths, where everyone plays a part in keeping our paths safe. I will now move on to address the members' questions on the bill. I thank members for the support of the e-scooter registration regime. As earlier mentioned, applicants will have to declare that their device is compliant with the device criteria upon registration. Ms. Rahayu Mazam had suggested undertaking measures to ensure continued compliance with the device criteria. We will consider appropriate measures and will continue to enforce against non-compliant devices found on public paths. Engineer Dr. Libiwa and Mr. Louis Ng asked about the parties that can register PMDs. Companies can own and register PMDs. We will take into account Engineer Dr. Lee and Ms. Tanalakshmi's feedback when deciding on the age for individuals who wish to register PMDs. Mr. Louis Ng asked whether LTA can refuse to register PMD for individuals who were previously convicted of active mobility-related offences. However, prohibiting the individual from registering a PMD does not prevent them from riding PMDs that they rent or borrow. Instead, it is better to educate them on safe riding behaviours, and this is why we have made it mandatory for reckless riders to attend the safe riding programme before they may compound their offence. Engineer Dr. Libiwa asked about circumstances in which PMDs can be deregistered. We expect the bulk of deregistrations to be due to applications by the registrant and LTA deregistering non-compliant PMDs. Legislatively, we have also provided for deregistration if LTA is satisfied that the device has ceased to be used on any footpath or shared path, and if the device is wholly unfit for further use. This is intended to cover scenarios like a deceased person's next of kin applying to deregister a PMD with sufficient proof of disposal, and when the PMD has deteriorated and is no longer serviceable, respectively. Mr. Dennis Tan and Mr. Louis Ng asked how registrants should deal with changes of ownership or when their PMDs cease to be used. If the registrant has sold his PMD to another person, he should apply to LTA to transfer the registration to the buyer. If the registrant has ceased to use the PMD, there is currently no legal obligation for him to deregister the PMD. However, it is in his interest to do so, as he would otherwise continue to be held responsible for the PMD. LTA will facilitate this by reminding registrants to deregister the devices if they are no longer being used. Owners should also ensure that their PMDs are properly disposed of to prevent subsequent misuse. This will ensure that they do not face a situation of continuing liability that Mr. Dennis Tan and Mr. Louis Ng highlighted. Mr. Melvin Yong asked how the 10 km/h device speed limit will impact genuine users of PMAs. We share his concern too. This is why AMAP has consulted agencies involved in elder care and with the disability community. We understand that occupational therapists do not generally recommend devices that travel above 10 km/h for the patient's own safety. AMAP also found that the vast majority of PMAs available in the market today already comply with this device speed limit. Thus, genuine users of PMAs should have little difficulty in complying with the new criterion. For those users who may require more assistance to comply, we will explore what we can do to assist them. Mr. Dennis Tan also asked about whether PMA users will be allowed on roads if the footpaths are obstructed. It is not an offence for PMA or PMD users to ride on roads in such a situation, but they should travel along the road only for the distance necessary to avoid the obstruction. Ms. Joan Pereira, Ms. Cheng Li Hui, and Mr. Melvin Yong expressed concern about fires caused by motorized PMDs. As earlier mentioned, we intend to require all motorized PMDs used on public paths to conform to the UL 2272 standard. We intend to prohibit the sale of devices that do not comply with UL 2272 from July 2019, and use of these devices on public paths from January 2021. I would also like to clarify if Mr. have put in place many safeguards to prevent the abuse of powers. I had earlier mentioned the explicit authorization that they will have to receive from the Chief Executive of LTA on the powers they can exercise. They have to be in uniform and display the identification card. To address Ms. Thanalakshmi's concern, uniforms will make the OEOs more recognizable to the general public. We will also undertake publicity measures to ensure the public is aware of the powers conferred on the OEOs. To answer Mr. Louis Ng's question, OEOs are subject to broader checks and balances when exercising their statutory powers, including possible judicial review, as are other enforcement officers such as the police and LTA officers. Mr. Melvin Yong asked about the qualifications and training of OEOs. Suitable qualifications include the private security guard license, as well as relevant security industry certifications such as WSQ qualifications. LTA will also ensure that the OEOs are suitably trained and have the necessary skill sets to carry out their functions safely and efficiently. I would also like to clarify with Mr. Louis Ng that the amendment to Section 50 of the AMA provides OEOs with the power to seize vehicles which are connected with offence under the AMA, such as non-compliant PMDs. OEOs will not be granted powers of disposal under the AMA. Mr. Louis Ng also asked why the bill removes the need for LTA to locate the owner prior to disposing of a vehicle under Section 53 of the AMA. This is because Section 50 of the AMA already requires LTA to notify the owner if known of the seizure. Mr. Melvin Yong asked whether the proposed penalties for causing damage to road infrastructure is sufficient to deter companies. Apart from raising the fine for intentionally engaging in conduct causing damage from 10,000 to 100,000, LTA also retains the option of suing for the full cost of repairs. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank all the members who have spoken on this bill and the many valuable suggestions and comments they have given. In summary, this bill supports our vision for a better and safer transport system by enhancing LTA's enforcement and regulatory powers. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move.
Engineer Lee Biwa.
Thank you, sir. I have two clarifications. Just now, SMS talked about compensation via mediation. and this is provided both parties agree to attend the mediation. So my question is, what if one party refuses to attend mediation, or the end result of mediation is not satisfactory? What recourse does the injured party have besides taking legal action? Second question is, Nee Soon Town Council, we have our bylaw where the open space, common area, there's no cycling allowed. So how is this can be continue to be implemented under the new Active Mobility Act or otherwise? Thank you.
I'd like to thank Engineer Dr. Lee Biwa for the two supplementary questions. On her first question on compensation avenues, currently there are three ways where the victim of accidents can seek compensation. The one which Engineer Dr. Lee Biwa mentioned was through a private settlement via mediation. And if this can reach agreement, such agreement can be enforced via a contract. The other possible avenue where victims can seek compensation is through civil action, i.e. to pursue a civil claim. And for this, the victim may have to initiate legal proceedings, unfortunately, against the cyclist or the person who caused the injury. And if the court rules in favor of the victim, then the court will have to order the defendant to pay damages to the plaintiff. And of course, the last modality where victims can actually seek redress will be to file a police report of the incident, and police will then carry out investigation to establish the cause and liability, and depending on the outcome of the investigation, the offender may also be charged, for other behavior like speeding or recklessness under the AMA, or for causing grievous hurt to others by a rash act under the Penal Code. And the victim may also choose to seek compensation. What I mean is that if it's found to be liable, then the court may also decide on the compensation amount that the injured person will receive. On the second question on the Town Council bylaws, the Active Mobility Act applies to all public paths, including paths in Town Council areas. And therefore, Town Councils are not allowed to ban PMDs on paths or enforce any bylaws that differ from the provisions in the AMA. The AMA will take precedence. The only exception to this is the void decks. And void decks are excluded from the AMA because it is not critical for connectivity, and the safety concerns at void decks are also stronger because of the layout, of the pillars. There may be many blind spots available. And for this, TC can choose to enact their own bylaws relating to the use of active mobility devices in void decks. But like I said, LTA will be happy, to find out the details from Engineer Dr. Lee Biwa on the incident or the example that she brought up. And we will work with the Town Council to see how we can better address some of the safety concerns in those areas mentioned by the member.
Mr. Dennis Tan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a clarification to what the SMS has just said about the right to commence action in court. Yes, there is such a right to commence action in court, but if the injuries are not very serious, the legal cost of commencing such an action are such that it may not be very worthwhile for parties to commence action in court. So in effect, for many people who suffered injuries which are not very serious in such incidents, the right of recourse to the courts may well be just an academic one. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Mr. Dennis Tan for that clarification, and indeed, he's right. So other than those avenues that I have mentioned, I think most importantly is that we need to educate road users, common path users, as well as PMD users on the ride etiquette, on riding responsibly as well as safely. And with that, we hope that such incidents or accidents can be minimized.
Engineer Lee Biwa.
Thank you, sir. I would like to reiterate, as I mentioned in my speech, there are areas that's very narrow passageway, not at the void deck, could be between two coffee shops or between the two supermarkets. I think LTA should give town council more leeway to manage the town council area. They know which are the areas that is dangerous, which are the areas they have high pedestrian traffic. I hope that LTA can amend the Active Mobility Act in this aspect so that the residents are safe at all times. Thank you.
Thank Engineer Lee Biwa for the comment, and I agree with her that safety of the users is paramount. I've also mentioned that we will work with her to see how we can address some of these concerns, and there can be other mitigating measures like making those vulnerable areas as PPZ or pedestrian priority zones, so that PMD users can exercise due diligence and caution when approaching such places, and also for users to also exercise, road users or pathways users, for themselves to exercise caution as well to prevent potential incident from happening. But I take it that Engineer Dr. Lee Biwa is very passionate about this issue, and that she's very concerned about the safety of her residents, and so are we. And we'll work with her to see how we can best address these concerns.
Mr. Zainal Sapari.
SMS, I think even with the best education, it only requires one irresponsible PMD user to cause an accident. If, let's say, the amount of compensation is huge, even after taking a legal recourse, the PMD users might not be able to pay that kind of compensation due to financial difficulty. What recourse then could the accident victims have in such a situation?
I'd like to thank Mr. Zainal Sapari for the supplementary question. And indeed, these are issues that LTA together with MOT do grapple with to see how we can best address them. And of course, one of the ways where we can actually address this issue is to encourage PMD users to purchase third-party liability insurance. And we will work with General Insurance Association as well as insurance companies to explore ways to make third-party insurance more into the sale of the PMD, so that when PMD users purchase the PMD, it comes with third-party liability insurance as well.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as are of the opinion say aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
The Land Transport Enforcement Measures Bill.
Committee stage what day?
Now, sir, I beg to move that Parliament will immediately resolve itself into a committee on the bill.
The question is that the Parliament will immediately resolve itself into a committee on the bill. As many as are of the opinion say aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that clauses 1 to 80 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Bill to be reported. Minister for Transport.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to report that the bill has been considered in committee and agreed to without amendment.
Third reading, what day?
Now, sir, I beg to move that the bill be now read a third time.
The question is that the bill be now read a third time. As many as are of the opinion say aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
The Land Transport Enforcement Measures Bill. Item 2, the Stamp Duties Amendment Bill, second reading.
Order. I propose to take a break now. I suspend the sitting and will take the chair at 4:40 p.m. Order. Order.